So today we'll be discussing writing for television and how to write a compelling TV pilot with the creator and showrunner of Manhunt, Monica Beletsky. Monica, thank you so much for sitting down with Outstanding Screenplays today.
Of course. Nice to meet you, Sophie.
Nice to meet you and really appreciate you being here with us. So I'm going to start with asking you just generally, how does writing for TV differ from other forms of screenwriting? And what should specifically new writers focus on when writing more episodic content?
I think that writing for TV, because of the nature of it, there's a speed to it compared to writing for features. Of course, as writers, we try to write professionally, as fast as possible. But because of production, TV just inherently has a demand where the scripts are being eaten as you're making it, as you're writing it, or in a lot of cases. Sometimes, like with Manhunt, I wrote drafts of the scripts, all the scripts before we started, but there's so much rewriting and changing that happens with adding collaborators, from the director to the actors to production, that you're kind of always writing up to the last minute. So I would just say I'm a real believer in the episode. I really believe that each episode should have its own sort of life to it and memorable aspects to it. And so I know that there's a trend recently where people see a show as sort of like a long movie or something like that. And I'm from a different camp where I really see it as more like, 7 1-hour movies that all tell a story together.
And how soon into filming do you see that it's translating well from the script to how you envisioned it? Or are there changes you need to make? Is it on day one that you realize it's the vision that you expected and how you saw the script?
A lot of work goes into the tone of a show. So there's tons of meetings before you have a show to make sure that your collaborators, costumes, production design, cinematographer, that you're all making the same show. And I think as showrunner, one of your main jobs is sort of keeper of the tone, because you're really the only person who completely has the vision for what this show is and why it's going to look different and be different than any other person's voice doing a similar story. And so there's a lot of meetings in the hiring, and then in the, you do a presentation for the studio. And so there's many points along the way where you're making sure that it's going to be what you sort of envisioned in your head, and hopefully even better than what you had in your head. And then it is a magical moment when the dailies start coming in. In the first week, it is really magical to see, or be on set and be behind the camera in the village and see it start to come to life.
Do you have a specific approach when crafting a compelling hook?
Yes, I think that a compelling hook is a combination of a character who is I'm talking about drama specifically here, not comedy, because that's my experience. But a compelling hook would be a character who is in a predicament that really thrusts them out of their normal experience, and they are trying to keep the normal experience back in the bottle, put it back in the bottle as much as they can, but there are greater forces that are keeping them from that. And so in telling that, it's always great to have sort of a key relationship that change in their life is affecting, and also a way that this new situation is affecting their relationship to their self, I would say. So a couple examples, with my show, with Manhunt, we've got the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, played by Tobias Menzies. And what really was the hook when I pitched it to Apple was, you know, imagine that you have been by the side of Abraham Lincoln for 3 years, you know, basically producing the Civil War behind the curtain with him, both having lost sons, both grieving fathers. You know, this is your work wife. And all of a sudden, you know, right after 5 days after you have victory, your friend is gone and was taken. And now it's your responsibility to find his killer. So that was a hook that, you know, it had a work relationship. It had something personal that's very universal, which is avenging your friend's death. And at the time, I didn't know that, you know, essentially Stanton was de facto president for about 12 hours. And so he was also sort of this unsung hero. So somebody who wasn't interested in the history necessarily might be interested in the avenging your friend's death part of that. You know, there's different ways that different audience could be compelled to that. And then there's, you know, some of our favorite pilots, of course, like a Breaking Bad or, you know, Mad Men, Sopranos. They all have this structure to it, right? Where, you know, everything's been going fine for Tony Soprano, but then he's having panic attacks. So something's not fine. And he's trying to cure that and put that and just go back to how he was, but he can't. And, you know, Breaking Bad, Walter White has the cancer diagnosis. And so he'd like to just keep being what he thinks is, you know, he's a good dad and husband and teacher, but, you know, things are, because of his insurance and everything, he can't keep continuing the way he was. So those are just some examples. And so I think those make great pilots. I also think there's another version of a pilot, like a Homeland, where your main character, it's not necessarily that their world has changed or something has impacted them, and they can't get back to normal. But, you know, in that one, she's the only one who's seeing something that nobody else is seeing. And because of her mental illness, that credibility, she needs to prove it before her credibility is destroyed, you know. So I think there's that structure too, which I think works really well of sort of, you know, it's not fish out of water, although fish out of water are good. But I think that, you know, whatever you can do to make that lead character a special person in special circumstances, that's a good angle for a pilot.
How soon did you know that you wanted to tell the story through Edward Stanton's perspective?
Pretty early on, I had read about the fact that the Lincoln assassination wasn't just an attack on Lincoln that night, but that there was an attack on the cabinet. And I had never been taught that or known that. So that was my initial interest in the topic, but I didn't really know where to go with that. Once I stumbled across the figure of Edwin Stanton and I realized this man was essentially president, you know, between Johnson and Lincoln for that night and morning, and that the whole investigation and where the country was going to go forward with Lincoln's legacy or not fell on his shoulders. It just ticked a lot of boxes for me. I was looking for a lead character who was a hero, not an anti-hero. I felt that we had sort of done anti-heroes for quite a while, and that the country, the culture, I just really felt like we need heroes. We need to see people in the classic Greek sense of what it takes really for progress, and really the kind of sacrifice, you know, like a lot of us think we can just click a bunch of likes on our social media and that we're making a difference, you know. And just to see that there were these people that really put it all on the line to make change, that was something, that was a story that I needed personally to see.
And was there a way to approach that so that, you know, this story would resonate with a modern audience?
I tried my best to make it very accessible. I didn't want to make a period drama that felt like at arm's length, like a museum piece. And so I worked really hard with my collaborators to make it feel very visceral and dirty and fresh, and even the language make it feel, like I could have had Lincoln say, "Oh, well, come to the seaside with us," but instead he's like, "Come to the beach with us." I just wanted it to feel like people are not that different then than they are now, and that that this was relatable, and that this wasn't something stuffy and like homework, but something that you could really experience how the stakes were at the time.
And in your experience, what makes a character introduction truly impactful? And what are the things you look for to really immediately draw an audience in?
It's a tough and challenging part of writing. I think the first couple pages and the first character introductions are probably some of the hardest parts of writing. I'm trying to think about my own work. I like to give the audience a handle very quickly on the personality of the person in the introduction. And I think that one of the ways you can do this is to show a choice that they make that's a little bit unexpected, and that would reveal who they are as a person.
So yeah, that's great advice there. If you're thinking to new writers to sort of be thinking about writing an early choice that maybe isn't, maybe a little bit out of the blue. Are there any other sort of tips for writers that when they're thinking about introducing a character?
I would say when you're introducing a character, you don't have a lot of time. And so I would think about how can you introduce them in a visual way, because it is a visual medium. And to remember that, stories for the screen are life intensified. So, sometimes I read a lot of emerging writers, and their scripts start with conversations or scenes that, yes, are true to life of the characters that they're portraying, but they're not necessarily necessary or important to the story. So you might have characters who are in an ice cream shop, and they're picking out the flavors that they like, and they're with their friends. That might be something those characters do, but is this actually necessary to set up the story and set up the tension of what your pilot is about? A lot of times the answer is no. So I think it's really important to set up what the status quo is of this character briefly. What is their life like before this pilot, essentially, or the premise of this pilot, and then to show how they're affected by the premise of this pilot.
And in terms of structure, how do you approach structuring a pilot? Are there specific beats that you need to hit? Or I'd love to know how you approach it.
It's good for me to think about, because I'm about to start writing a pilot. I think that I sort of have had ingrained in me the act structures. And so even though a lot of times what we're writing for is for streaming, is for things that don't necessarily have commercial breaks anymore, it's still really advisable to know the craft of what happens in different acts. And so, honestly, I came from a theater background, and so I worked on classic plays for many, many years. I think looking at Shakespearean heroes at their soliloquies from Act 1 to Act 5 is a really good way to look at pilot structure. You can see how everyone from Othello to Hamlet, it teaches you arc, right? It teaches you, like, how does a character change psychologically over a period of time. And then I would suggest watching, your favorite pilots, critically acclaimed or popular or both, and just study, how much do these people change in 1 hour? And so I think that's all very helpful. And I wrote something up that's on the internet somewhere about the act structure, but basically I don't know it by heart, but basically how you have the setup, and then you have the conflict, and then there's usually a hitch in the story of something they didn't expect. Usually around act 4 is something very emotional that happens. Some conflict erupts. It could be romantic, it could be violent, it could be emotional, or all three. And then you can either choose to sort of have a denouement and sort of a coda to an episode. Like on Parenthood, we would do a lot of sort of grace note beats at the end of episodes, which are sort of melancholy, peaceful, emotional beats that are the aftermath of a story. If you want your episode to feel more cliffhangery, you almost want to drop that fifth act and end with your fourth act. So you're sort of ending with the conflict take you into the next episode.
Did your theatre background influence the kind of writing that you appreciate? Because often in theatre, I feel like we get to see a lot more. Well, we get to have, especially with dialogue, there's a lot more sort of time to spend getting to really know that individual sometimes. Did that kind of influence your writing at all for TV?
Yes, I think, theater is really good at having people in a room who have conflict. And, I think television more than film comes from that world. And so, there are situations like in Manhunt where Booth and his friend Harold are just waiting in the woods for a couple of days. And I knew when I read the story of their escape that was always going to be a challenge, like a waiting for Godot in the woods, because there's no documentation of what the heck they were saying or doing in the woods for 2 days. So I remember very early on thinking, wow, that's going to have to be good, interesting dialogue and relationship stuff. But then hopefully you have a balance of that with action and other things. But yeah, I mean, studying all the greats, Tennessee Williams, Chekhov, all of that, I think helped me, just inspired me to want to write complicated characters psychologically. And, they all do different things. So Chekhov is so good at what's not being spoken, right? Whereas like a Shakespeare, it's like everything is sort of spoken. So yeah, it's just, I think it's great to know sort of where you come from in terms of just dramatic literature. That's what we are doing. And I think Shakespeare would have been an amazing screenwriter. He wrote structurally a lot like what we still do today.
And when it comes to the balance between creative ambition and budget considerations, and how much does that play a part when you're writing and running a show?
Budget is a huge piece of being a showrunner. I think a lot of times people think because they've sort of grown up watching so much TV and can write a great pilot, perhaps, that they're ready to be a showrunner. I didn't get to become a showrunner for 14 years, which is a little extreme given my experience. But, sometimes I'll say to people, hey, it's Friday and the executives have just asked you to take $500,000 out of the budget by Monday. Do you know how to do that? Because that is part of the job. And so, it's really helpful to come up in rooms and understand, night scenes cost more than day scenes, and having, day players who have dialogue costs more than if they don't say anything. And, there's just a lot of ways manage the budget. But it's always helpful to know what you're writing towards. So, it's very helpful to know ahead of time what each episode is going to be able to what you're going to be able to spend, and to write towards that. And we're usually happy to write to any budget. It's just helpful to know what the target is.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you share a time when you took a unique approach to a familiar genre or theme that helped a show stand out, or generally that helped a concept feel sort of fresh and distinct?
I mean, I can only really speak about my own work, and I will say that I tried for years to get dramas made, both on the feature side and the television side. And I learned a lot from Jordan Peele, saying that with Get Out, he Trojan horsed what he wanted to say about, I'm paraphrasing, but race in America with horror, because he was able to Trojan horse themes that, if he had come in saying, hey, I want to make a movie about, how Black men are seen in America, he probably wouldn't have gotten that movie made. But once it's a horror movie, that just brings in a lot of interest that might not be there for the other theme. So I really took that to heart. And as soon as I started putting my ideas in the context of genre, I started selling my ideas a lot easier, and a lot faster. And so with Manhunt, it could have been just a history piece. But I wanted it to be an investigation, a true crime, treatment of that story. And I think doing that and making a cat and mouse, the Tobias Menzies character isn't really the protagonist in the book. It's really about Booth's escape. So once I shaped it that way, I think that all of a sudden then you can see something that's going to appeal to a lot more people. And that's, usually what we're looking for. So that's the tip that I give. That was a very hard won wisdom for me. I'm working on something right now that's got a supernatural element, that before it had a supernatural element wasn't appealing to people. And then all of a sudden it was, because of that. So if there's a way that your, drama can lean into it being a romance, or, a crime or something like that, I just think that it really helps elevate it.
So if you have a particularly niche story, you should always be bearing in mind the marketability to a sort of wider audience.
I mean, I don't want to tell every artist that, because of course there are these breakout films and stories for TV that are not that. But I will say that straight drama is one of the hardest things to get made, to get greenlit. And so if there is an approach that you can be happy with, then that leans into a genre, horror, thriller, you will for sure up your chances of actually realizing that dream.
And at the moment, are there current genres that are sort of more appealing to streaming services, in your opinion? And how much should new writers be paying attention to sort of current trends, if at all?
I really don't know what, from week to week, what is appealing right now. I'm just not on that side of the business. I can only do my best guess and work on what I am selling and working on. But I would say, because it's probably the toughest time in television history, fiscally, and there's been a lot of contraction. My approach is, how can I tell stories that appeal to me, that I feel that I can write well, that are going to appeal to as many people as possible, but still be authentic to my voice and my, a wheelhouse of what I'm able to do. I will say I had an experience recently where I really wanted to do something set in the 1980s, and I had reasons for that. And, I had been hearing no period, nobody wants to do period. And, yet I just pulled off a very giant period show. So it is possible still, but the people I was potentially selling it to very politely and without really wanting to step on my vision for it said, is there any version of this that could be contemporary? And at first, I had a knee jerk, like, that just makes it less good. But then I thought about it because I really do want to make another show soon. And I understand, their concerns financially, period, just adds a lot of money to the budget. So I thought about it, and I thought about a subculture that could work in it that was not, available in the 80s. And I'm actually really in love with the idea now, and it actually makes a lot more sense for the themes that I want to explore doing it now. So it ended up a great prompt and a great steer, even though it is sort of a cliche, request. And now I'm like not even looking back. Like I actually think this version is superior than the one I started with.
Just on that one quickly, how much in general do you think, because it's quite an interesting point you've brought up, how much in general do you think writers should keep feedback in mind and be adaptable to feedback, and then where should they sort of stand their ground?
I mean, it's a constant part of the job, and I mean constant, like multiple times a day you're negotiating what you want versus what other people want. So it's hard without a specific example to say, but I would just say you really have to draw the line when it's about maintaining the integrity of the idea that you sold and that they bought.
With the streaming services, in your opinion, are there particular qualities that they look for in a TV pilot script at the moment?
I think that the saying nobody really knows anything is true. And I think that, in some cases, yes, people feel like, oh, we have enough procedurals and our algorithm or our research has told us we really need a female driven romance or a thriller. Sometimes you come across something like that. But I would say mostly what I would say is people are looking for something that moves them. They're looking for something that hits them emotionally and makes them feel something. If it's comedy, they're looking for something that makes them laugh. And if it's drama, they're looking for something that moves them. And if you can do that, which very few people can, have other people affected by your story, your characters, you're going to have success, because that is really at the end of the day, the craft, the skill that people are looking for and why we really do this to begin with, I think. And so in the pitches that I've had that have been successful, every single one of them, I can viscerally feel that I have moved the people in the room with the story.
And as well as having a really strong concept, a strong script, are there other things in a pitch that a new writer should be looking to bring to the table, be it the sort of vision boards, or are there any particular things that you think, as well as a strong story and script, you should add in?
I like to bring cardstock headshots of the actors who would be my dream actors for the lead roles. And I put the character names below them and I put them on the table. And it just gives the executive something to interact with, interface with. And really it's sort of a first step of getting other people to see what's in your brain. And it starts to feel real, right? If you see a cast, in front of you, it's like, oh yeah, I could see that show, and I'd be excited to work with those actors. So that's one thing that I do, and I find it really effective.
And for career advice now for new writers out there, I'd love to know, what were the early steps you took as a TV writer to help you get noticed?
It was helpful that I had a theater background, because some of the people I worked with in theater were shifting into television work. I didn't end up getting jobs from them, but I was able to have conversations with them, set visits with them, where I just got a sense of what the job was like and got some advice. But again, I would say the most important thing would be to have written scripts that move people, that people can't forget. That was the biggest thing. Was I wrote a weed spec at the time that had an ending that people really remembered, and it hit them emotionally, especially women. And then I wrote a feature script about Einstein's first wife that most of the town read, and I never was able to get it made, but it was the kind of thing where people would say to me things like, oh, I started it at 10 o'clock and I was just going to read 10 pages, and I stayed up reading the whole thing. So I think, it sounds simple and not simple, but the number one way you can make progress in this business is to write stuff that really affects people.
So it sounds like it very much did affect people, and that led to things, but you just also mentioned that you weren't able to get it made. So it obviously, rejection can be a huge part of getting going. What are your tips for handling any kind of rejection when you're starting?
Rejection isn't just when you're starting. It's throughout the whole career, I would say. I think having good friends, I think that has helped me the most, is having close friends who are also on the journey and who celebrate your wins and understand your frustrations as they are experiencing it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk a bit on the landing your first job on a TV show in a writer's room. What was that experience like for you? Because I think that can be quite being in a writer's room for the first time could be quite a daunting experience, especially for new writers that haven't done it before. So I'd love to hear what your first experience was like with that.
I sort of had three first experiences in a way. I was a writer's assistant on the 4th season of Lost, and that was like my grad school. So in that kind of situation, you're not there to pitch, you're not there to be another writer. But I was in a room with, 8 to 10 brilliant writers, and 26 characters, their flashbacks, their flash forwards, all the versions that could happen. So that was a, education of storytelling. And then after that, I landed my first job on a 2nd season soap for NBC called Lipstick Jungle that was, on the precipice of being canceled from the moment we were hired till it was canceled. And so Oliver Goldstick gave me my big break on that show. And they were looking for a young woman who had recently lived in New York City, which I was at the time. I think I was 29, 28, 29. And in some ways it was great because there weren't a ton of stakes. It wasn't like I was working on a huge hit show, and if I don't pitch well, I could affect the, popularity of the show or something like that, So it was a bit of easing into it. And several people mentored me on that. I actually ended up, there were so many voices in that show that I actually ended up leaning more into helping with the music on that show. I had a lot of friends who were independent musicians, and so I ended up hiding out in the edit bay a lot and helping them place music. I think I got like 30 songs on the show or something. So that was an experience. And I got to go to New York City and be on set for the first time. So that was a very helpful experience. Then I was out of work for about 9 months, and I sort of thought my career was going to be over because I thought, well, who is really looking for a woman who has been on a second season show that was canceled? Like, there's no demand for that. So I wrote some pilots, and then I read all the pilots for the next staffing season. And there was one script that was set in Philadelphia, which was my hometown. There was a couple characters in it who were in a mixed race family, which is my background. And the writing, the actual sentences, there were a couple times when I read the phrasing where I thought, wow, that's how I would have written that. That is very weird. And that script was Parenthood by Jason Katims. So I had a manager at the time. I called my manager and I said, look, I understand that there's no demand for me in this market, but I just read this script and I just relate to it so much. I really think that I could contribute to these characters. And if you could just get me one meeting this staffing season, can you please get me a meeting with this Jason guy? And so my manager apparently called every single day for a while and bugged the shit out of them. Said, you have to read this girl. So I got the meeting with Jason, and I was feeling pretty not great about myself, you know, because of being unemployed and everything. And I heard this talk by Glenn Mazzara, who's a showrunner, and he explained how nervous he was when he met with showrunners, and that no matter how insecure you're feeling, you need to go in there and don't hide your light in a bushel. You need to present the best version of yourself. And really, you know, writers don't tend to be people who want to sort of brag about ourselves or put ourselves forward, but you really have to bring up, you know, what it is that makes you qualified or have the stories for these characters. So I really took that to heart, and I decided not to be completely self-deferential like I might have been. And so I went in there and I, you know, explained why I related to certain characters and how some of my family structure, whether it was having, you know, a single mom in my family or this or that, you know, ways that I felt I had stories for these characters. And he was immediately like, oh, wow, this is great, because I haven't thought a lot about the supporting characters and stories for them. And you're really thinking about that. And within a couple minutes, it just felt like, I don't know, like he was like an uncle of mine or something. It just felt like we had a rapport. And he looked at me and he was like, are you sure you're not more right for Friday Night Lights? And I was like, am I in a dream right now? What's happening? And so I didn't want to talk myself out of a job for another job that may or may not exist. But anyway, it became this very incredible career moment for me, where I ended up being hired on both shows at the same time. And so I was on staff on Parenthood and Friday Night Lights, and I would help with the storylines on both. And so that to me was like my real big break. And, you know, I just was there for about 6 seasons combined with those two shows, and learned, you know, so much about emotional storytelling and structure and arcs and all the things that you were asking about. And I really wish that for more people today, that they could have more experience with the same characters season to season, because you really do learn certain muscles doing that, as opposed to doing a limited for a couple seasons and then a different one, you know.
And then on the other side of things, what is it that a showrunner looks for from a writer?
It depends. I think tone is a big thing to try to find, you know, can you find writers who understand the tone of what you are trying to accomplish and perhaps have samples of that? That can be a tricky one to find. You want to find people who have personalities that aren't going to take up all the air in the room. You want to find people who, are emotionally intelligent to know, that this is about taking turns. You want to find people who take initiative, who are going to go find something that you're looking for without you even having to ask. You want to find people who are collaborative and also understand that there is a hierarchy in a room and that there's a reason for it. And at the end of the day, it is the showrunner who is making the calls. And for example, we were creating a mother character on a show I worked on, and this character had no story yet. And so we spent all day arguing about, should she be a stay-at-home mom? Should she be a working mom? Should she be, a tough love mom? Should she, everyone had different ideas about it. Then the showrunner came in and we were presenting different angles. And he was just like, 8 writers are never going to agree on who a mom is. I'll decide and I'll show you who it is, because we all just have such different relationships to motherhood and our own mothers. So I think, understanding that ultimately you are working for someone else's vision. You might do it a different way if it were your show, but it's not your show. And so, you want to help the showrunner when you're on staff make the best version of their show, not what you would do.
And you've touched on it a bit, but how important is it to sort of build connections within the industry? And then what are the tips for new writers to build authentic connections within the industry?
I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that. I'm not someone who goes to a lot of social things. And that really wasn't something that, was my path. I think that once you are working with people, being excellent is the way forward. And so, Oprah says something like, no matter what you're doing, if you're serving fries, if you're, give them napkins, like just be the person that is going to be thoughtful and excellent no matter what your role is. And so, if your job is being a PA and you're getting coffee and you're getting the lunches and you're getting the magic markers, like be the best at that and not be chomping at the bit to be the person pitching in the room. Because if you're messing up the coffee, like no one's going to be ready for you to pitch in the room. So just sort of, be excellent at where you are at. And then, if you're working with decent people, they will give you the opportunity to prove yourself in other ways. And I think that one way to do that in terms of like, as opposed to connections, like at parties or whatever, I don't know much about that. But what I will say is I have hired people who did research for me, who I did a lot of true stories, a couple movies and pilots that were all fact-based. So I needed a lot of help with reading and research. And that was a way for me to then have a rapport with a younger person and build a trust, build a way of working together that I then, I staffed one of those assistants. So I think working closely with writers in other capacities where they'll give you a shot is always, not always, but should be a way to get your shot.
And when you look back over your career, is there anything that you know now that you wished you'd known when you started?
I think my only regret is that I never made a film or a short film where I was a writer director, because I think that has held me back. I think show running is filmmaking, but it's, for whatever reason, there's this bias in the industry for writer directors, even though showrunners do basically everything filmmakers do, except, you know, working directly with the DP. So I think that had I done that, I would be seen differently and I would have different opportunities that I still have yet to prove.
And with that, how important then do you think it is for sort of writers to have other disciplines, be it directing or know how to produce or even know how to work the camera?
I think in this climate, having diversity of talents is good, as long as you are able to work at a certain level in multiple facets, as opposed to just being okay at, you know, a couple things. So yeah, I think it's a huge asset. And I think we need more people interested in other aspects besides writing and directing, you know, in terms of like, we need different voices who are going to be reading stuff, you know, and developing stuff, you know, so that people, when they write stuff from a different culture or a different perspective, there's people on the other side of the table who actually understand what it is you're trying to, you know, do. Um, and, you know, everything across the board is still, you know, very male dominated. So, you know, we need more women production designers and cinematographers and editors. But I would say, you know, do what you love, and, you know, there's still certainly room for being someone like me that, you know, is a writer producer. But certainly if, you know, if you can't get your writing going, but you have a friend who has a great script or something like that, and you can produce that, you know, that's a great way to go too.
Monica, it's been amazing to sit down and pick your brains on all of this. I just want to say, is there any sort of final insights or lessons that you've learned over the years that you can pass on to aspiring TV writers?
Oh boy.
The words of wisdom.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but you know, I would just say that the perseverance is a huge part of it. Improving your work is a huge part of it. And I guess I would say that people don't rewrite as much as I think they need to, and in general. And I don't think the general population understands how much, as professionals, we rewrite, even when we've been doing this for, you know, over a decade. So I think that if you think that you wrote a script and you can sort of just, you know, do a pass on it and check for typos, it's very rare to find a writer who is sort of a first draft writer. They exist, and I know some, but more than not, you have to be the kind of person who is willing to look at it and look at it and look at it again and change it and change it and change it until it really is the best told version that you can write.
If you had to give a sort of estimate of a number for the amount of drafts that you do, what would it be roughly?
If you saw my files, you would be shocked. I can't even imagine, but I would say 8, maybe, you know, 8 per script, maybe.
Monica, thank you so much. It's been amazing to talk to you. I really appreciate you spending time with me and chatting through everything. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. You have great questions, Sophie. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate it, Monica. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.